my channel mostly before. I haven't done too much about trans. I have interviewed some sort of trans people, often the controversial ones who don't go along with a lot of the ideology, because the ones who do won't come on the show. I keep asking them, they will not do it, and part of me understands because they feel like that's their identity. They shouldn't have to explain it to someone who's skeptical, and I get that. But then part of me also thinks it might be because there's a circular reasoning that might be exposed after one or two questions.
I would say, yeah, I'm sure there's a few people who would be extremely sensitive about their identity. However, I think the vast majority are just, they know they can't defend it. These positions are untenable. You know, it's like, I'll give you a good example. If single-sex spaces don't exist and a man who identifies as a woman can go into a woman's changing room or whatever it happens to be, you immediately stop observant religious Muslims, Jewish women from entering these spaces, you know? So there's this kind of weird balance that's not really a balance. That, oh yeah, we're going to destroy women's spaces, and we also support Muslim people. Well, you don't, because you're not respecting their beliefs on this one. So they don't want to say these things out loud, because as soon as you express them, a friend of mine has a brilliant phrase. She says, trans rights activists cannot say what they believe on the grounds it may incriminate them. You know, and it's I see it over and over again. These people cannot actually articulate their positions, because if they did, they would be arguing for instance, an end to women's sports, an end to women's spaces. Have you ever heard of the phrase the urinary leash?
No.
The urinary leash was I'm not sure who came up with it, but it was a feminist phrase. And it meant that before there were public toilets that divided into male and female, women couldn't really go far from their house. They were on a urinary leash, because once they got to a certain place, there was nowhere for them to go and be safe, you know. They're arguing for that to be brought back, you know.
Yeah.
And no one is but the conversation, the debate can't happen because they pretend that's not their argument.
I suppose their argument, if we were to steel man the argument and make theirs the best it can be, is those women should learn to be as good and worthy and righteous as we are, and to recognize that these biological males are now women, and so they should be comfortable in changing rooms with them.
Sure, but again, you know, like, how is a woman supposed to know the difference between, you know, and I'll use an example of a friend of mine, my lovely trans friend, Debbie Hayton.
Oh, she's been on the show.
Yeah, I thought you might have spoken to Debbie.
But Buck Angel's the other one that we've had.
Buck, amazing person. But how are women supposed to know the difference between Debbie and Andrew Miller, who has just been arrested for picking up a 11-year-old girl in Scotland and raping her over a series of days? And the judge made a point of saying that the reason this young girl got in the car was because he was dressed as a woman, you know? How are individuals supposed to know the difference, you know?
Yeah. Well, I've often heard people on that other side of the argument say, oh, so you're saying that trans people are going to all do horrible, devious things. And I think the response is no, but they'll probably do them at the same rate as biological men do, which is enough.
But it's also, the question is also, what does trans mean? Like, you know, I think one of the reasons that my cancellation was so kind of universally approved of was because most people thought I was talking about transsexuals, like Debbie. But that's not what's going on. You have people who are fully intact. Apparently the number is something like 83% of trans-identified men are fully intact. And they are demanding the same rights that we have very rightly given to transsexuals for years. And it's like, well, no, there's a difference. There is a difference. And the thing that really upsets me is that you see a lot of these kind of trans influencers who are, as I say, fully intact, and they're encouraging children to get these procedures done. And there's no such thing as a successful transition, you know? They all come with lifetime problems. If you transition, you're going to be going to the hospital a lot, you know, regularly. And that's not, no one's telling these kids this, you know?
One of the reasons I wanted to do this as well, like my channel has traditionally focused on cults, Scientology, and things like that. And there are so many similarities, again, with the words that change and these kinds of things. And I thought eventually I have to come out and talk about this. And I know it's going to lose a lot of followers. And so be it, eventually you have to just say, well, and as you've said, we're not having a go at trans people or this or that. It's just saying, hang on, there are certain things that don't hold up to logic. And as soon as you start to do that, you're veering away from truth and science. And I think that is cult-like and it needs to be brought up.
I think you're right about it. It's an interesting one, though. It's not quite a cult, because I believe the definition of a cult needs a leader. And there's no leader here, but there is what I think called a kind of confluence of aims. Like, there's a lot of people who benefit from the kind of muddiness around terms like trans. So, like, for instance, one of the things I talk about in the book, bloke who called the police on me several times, has sued me twice, is a guy, Stephanie Hayden. And it's his third identity. He's a long-time con man who, in fact, you might want to cut this bit out because he will try and sue you. But like
just note to editor, maybe cut the name. Is that what we should?
Maybe a good idea.
Cut the name of that person.
Yes. And but what he does is he sends a legal document. Tries to frighten people, and then a few days later he says, "I'll drop the case for 500 quid." And with me, he went up to 4,500.
Wow!
Because he thought I was rich. So we said no, and unfortunately at that point I didn't know about crowdfunding, so we spent a lot of our own money trying to fight him, and eventually he just dropped it. But like, this is a guy who's on the run from people he owes rent to. There was a very funny moment in one trial where they were talking about. I think it was a conviction that he had. And he said, "Oh, that was just for passing bad checks in Wales." It's like, it's such a strange, why is that an excuse?
I was just passing bad checks.
Yeah, just bad, but like, it's a normal thing that people do. So he's a very good example of someone who is using the confusion around this issue, to make money. And there's several examples of people like this. A lot of the people who are in this kind of some of the more vocal trans activists are, legitimately dangerous people. They're legitimately mentally unwell. Some of them,
they're probably the outliers. But,
yes,
but maybe the point is, I guess the point is here. I've spoken about this before as well. I'm like wary of repeating myself for listeners. I'm not listening to this anymore. I've heard it before. But I did a poll on my YouTube channel. Are trans women literally, and I think I put literally in capital letters to be very clear, women? Are they literally women? And 90% said no, but 10% said yes.
Right.
And that 10% are saying a thing that's obviously not true. So I don't know what percentage of those people are saying it because they're pissed off I asked the question in maybe a misleading way, or who actually believes it. But what a lot of people in the comments said was, I don't really know, I don't care, but like, well, just be kind. Why does it matter? And I think what you're saying is, if you change these rules for certain people, then some other people who are the outliers, not, you're not having to go at the trans people.
Yeah.
It's people who can take advantage of it.
But having said that, unfortunately, a lot of these outliers are central figures in the trans movement. Like, the best example I can think of is someone called Amy Challoner. Amy Challoner was a rising star in the Green Party, was part of Stonewall's trans advisory board for years, at a time when they were introducing self-ID across society, and Challoner's father was a who assaulted a girl in the attic of the family home. Challoner is now going in a relationship with another whose father introduced him to. So his father turns out to have been a very dangerous groomer who seems to have kind of wrapped his adopted son up in all this stuff, and really, really kind of messed him up. But that is someone who was right at the heart of the trans movement and is still a moderator on Reddit, we think, So
that's always going to happen with any movement, because the loudest are the most lunatic-y.
Yes, especially with this issue, because this is such a mad, some of the beliefs are so insane that anyone who is willing to go on and I don't know if you saw, but there was bizarre debate with Frida Wallace and Peter Tatchell and Helen Joyce recently, where Frida Wallace is, he's just a deranged alcoholic man. He takes photographs of himself being blown in. This is all. Every time I talk about this, it sounds so unbelievable. But he takes photographs of himself being blown in a dungeon.
Wow.
And it's like, why is this man even being given the time of day? It's because he's the only one who's kind of, mad enough to say these opinions out loud, So, yes, the problem, it's not all trans. Of course, it's not all trans people. If I was saying that, I wouldn't be friends with Debbie or I wouldn't be a supporter of Buck and people like this, Of course it's not. But there are a number of very dangerous people who are using this activism. And they have too much traction. Amy Challoner, the person I just spoke about, managed to get Sadiq Khan to change tube announcements from ladies and gentlemen.
Wow.
So these
influence.
It's too much influence for people who are at best disordered in their thinking. And so but then you have someone like Debbie, and Debbie is like, respects women's spaces, doesn't use them, is fully transsexual, is an actual transsexual, and absolutely gets murdered by the same people.
Yeah. The bigotry of small differences.
Yeah. So why isn't Debbie like the person who is on all these news? I know he does go on news shows, and Debbie understands why I call him he. I have to at the moment. Why isn't Debbie seen as a leader? But Debbie is not seen as a leader. Debbie is seen as a turncoat and a traitor.
That's the worst.
Yeah. So he gets a terrible hard time from his, from what you would suppose would be his people, But I think it just proves that it's not a human rights movement. It's a political, ideological movement.
Those people who are on my YouTube saying like, look, I don't really know or care, but what's the harm? What's the harm? What is the simplest for those? Because they're not going to know about all the real, that's too much. Sure. What's the simplest way of explaining why is it a problem, some of this?
Well, I mean, there's so many different aspects to it that it's hard to just kind of round on one, but like, I don't know. I mean, Buck Henry recently interviewed a 22-year-old transsexual who, her appearance is of a woman with long hair, lots of makeup, and he has just realized in the last few weeks that his doctors lied to him. They said he would become literally a woman. They said that, and not only did he believe it, his parents believed it.
10% of my audience believe it.
Yeah. So like, this guy now has no sexual function, has no penis. He's a gay man who has had his sexual, life ended at 22. There was another famous video. This young woman. And this is it's such a heartbreaking interview, but like, she now looks like a balding middle-aged man. She has male pattern baldness because that's what the testosterone did to her. She was told that she would become a young, virile, gay man.
Yeah. And
instead, she has this like appearance that looks like an accountant in a sitcom, and it was a lie. So when people say, "Oh, be kind," if you really want to be kind, you got to protect future versions of these kids who are being told an appalling lie. Like, I'll give you another interesting one. I know this is very in the weeds, so to speak, but here's another interesting thing that I found out recently. Gay men have been telling me, a lot of young women who've been told that they're men, and they either have double mastectomies or they just have a very kind of masculine appearance or whatever. They are now going into gay spaces, and they are expecting gay men to be in romantic relationships. one of the gay spaces that this goes on in is Grindr, the hookup app.
Yeah.
Straight men are predating on those young women on Grindr. So straight men are joining Grindr.
Of course, right.
To predate on young women for whom the testosterone is not kicked in yet. And so and the way they talk about these women is disgusting, And it's like, you've got to look out for, you can't just say be kind. You have to be kind. You have to look out for these people.
Well, you have to be cool to be. I know it's such a cliche. You have to be cool to be kind sometimes. If it was easy, if everything was be kind, if that's how your best results in humanity were achieved, why wouldn't everyone be doing it? Of course they would. If you raise your children that way, just be kind. Anyone who's got kids, I don't, but friends of mine do. If you're just kind to them all the time, no way. They take over everything. They're screamers. They won't learn about boundaries or anything like that. So, and the road to hell paved with good intentions. This channel I've got about cults, Scientology. The stuff at the beginning of Scientology is brilliant.
Oh, yeah, no, sure.
It tells all these people, you can actually take control of your life. It's a little bit like what Jordan Peterson sometimes says. You can be in charge of who you are. You can do it. The problem is they take it so far that even when you've been violently attacked by a Hollywood celebrity, they say that was your fault because you did that to yourself. So that's where it goes too far. But these are all like, be kind, be nice. It's taking it too far without actually thinking about the consequences.
Absolutely. And I remember Tottenham Court Road, there was a Scientology centre, you may know it.
Yes.
And I remember, getting into arguments with the people outside, and they had no idea what we were talking about because they had not advanced through the various levels to receive full, what's the word?
You've got to get to OT3. Operating Thetan 3 is when you learn about Lord Zeno.
Yes, exactly. And they were lower levels. They didn't know it was all going on. And I noticed the same thing with trans activists who either don't believe or they, you can show them photographs of children who have, children like pubescent or just post-pubescent children who have double mastectomies. And they don't see it as even if they either don't believe it's true or they twist it. So they say, why are you sharing these photographs of children? And it's like everything except addressing the issue, which is these kids are I'm friends with a guy called Malcolm Clark, who you should interview at some point. I think you'd really get a lot out of it. He is an ex-producer on the BBC science show Horizon.
Oh right, yeah, I know.
And I remember Arthur and I were once watching that show, and I didn't realize, I only found this out recently, but Malcolm produced the show, and it was about people who believed that they should cut their legs off because they felt body dysphoria about their legs or their limbs. So they did this. And I remember at the time, Arthur and I were watching the show, and it was, in that dark way, it was very funny because there was a person all through the show talking about getting a leg cut off, speaking to doctors about it. It was all arranged. And then they interviewed him after it was done. And they were like, that was a terrible mistake.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And they suddenly realized, as soon as it happened, they realized it was wrong. So that practice was discontinued in every field except pediatrics. How do you say it?
For kids doctors.
Kids doctors.
Let's just say kids doctors.
Yeah, okay.
Pediatricians?
Pediatricians, yeah. So how did the idea of you can cut a bit off yourself and you'll be happy, how did it survive in just this one area?
Ironically, podiatrists do cut bits off you and you're happy.
That's true.
So
That's true.
if you'd said that,
Yeah.
I get